Well, So with Dylan Larkin looking to leave, obviously the initial teams reported being Vegas, Florida, and Minnesota. That doesn't leave a whole lot of room for Detroit to get a package out of that I think really benefits them. Obviously, with Larkin leaving, I don't think they're ever really going to get a package that's better than just losing Dylan Larkin. But with one of the teams being Utah and the Utah interest in Sebastian Kosa, I think there's a package that could work for both teams. So, with that being said, a trade that I think might mimic a similar return for Dylan Larkin was the Jack Eichel trade in 2021 from the Buffalo Sabres to the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, at the time, Jack Eichel had a really bad injury history, and I think while it was expected he would come back and be healthy, at the time, I think that a similar return could be seen for Dylan Larkin. Buffalo received Alex Tuch, Peyton Krebs, a 2022 first and a 2023 second round pick that was conditional. So I think in this case, what I'm going to try and do is make a return that's very similar to the Eichel trade, but for Dylan Larkin. Now, I do want to mention, I don't think that Dylan Larkin's going to get the same return that Jack Eichel will, but I think we could structure it similarly in terms of a first-line center going into another team. Now, in the case of the Dylan Larkin and Utah trade, I think that what we're going to be looking for is 1 to 2 players that are ready now. Obviously, one being a center coming back, at least a first-round pick, and at least a prospect. Now, with that being said, I want to add Sebastian Kosa to the trade on the Detroit side, going back to Utah, because 1, they have interest, and 2, I think that makes up the gap between Larkin and Eichel. Now, to start this off, I want to start with the roster player that I think will be going back for Dylan Larkin, and I think that's Barrett Hayton. Barrett Hayton is approximately a half point per game center, which has a ton of value in the NHL. Now, looking at Alex Tuch's stats from the 2020-2021 season in Vegas, he's also operating at just over a half point per game pace, and I do think that in the case of this trade, Barrett Hayton has a little bit less value than Alex Tuch did here. Looking at Peyton Krebs and specifically the 2020-21 season when he was traded, it looks like he's putting up approximately 2 points per game in the WHL, which is really solid and a good sign for a young prospect. Now, to compare more apples to apples, we're looking at TJ Ginla. Looking at the 25-26 season that he had in the WHL for the Kelowna Rockets, he's putting up roughly the same 2 points per game in the WHL. And also similarly to Peyton Krebs, he also played time in the U20 World Juniors. I think that whilst Peyton Krebs at the time was probably worth a little less than what TJ Ginla is worth now, I think they can be comparable in this situation. The last part of this trade obviously being Caleb Desnoyers. Now, I think in real life, if you were to try and propose Larkin for all of the pieces that we've discussed previously, Utah would probably laugh in your face and tell you to go kick rocks. However, I think in this case, because we're including Sebastian Kosa, which could be their goalie of the future and is a really well-regarded goalie prospect, adding Caleb Desnoyers as almost a like-for-like in this situation, while it's not probably likely, it would be a really cool addition to this trade. The other additional part of it is obviously with Larkin going out and Detroit getting a cost-controlled center in Barrett Hayton, I do think it's important that they get some young prospects back, and specifically center prospects with both Nate Danielson and Marco Kasper seemingly struggling to grasp hold of that top 6 center role. I think Caleb Desnoyers could be that for the Red Wings. Alright guys, so going into the rosters, we're going to be using the official Fran Ready V3 roster. It's the closest thing I could find to the Tactics and Vassy rosters that are typically on Xbox on the PlayStation. So as you can see, looking in the player movement section, we obviously have Dylan Larkin moved to the Utah Mammoth, as well as if we scroll down a little bit further, we have Sebastian Kosa, who is also in the Utah Mammoth. If we move over to the Detroit Red Wings side, obviously Larkin is no longer here, but we've moved Barrett Hayton, as well as if we scroll down to the pick section, we see that in the 2026 draft, we now have the Utah first round pick. The last thing that you'll see in the player movement section is Cam Talbot is on the Grand Rapids Griffins. We're actually going to be releasing him at the start of the season because he would be in free agency, but I was having troubles making the rosters work out and having enough goalies in each team. As well as if we scroll down a little bit further, not only do we have TJ Ginla, but we also have at the very bottom, Caleb Desnoyers is also moved into Grand Rapids. Starting in the settings, when we look at the career settings that we're going to be using, we have owner mode turned off. I have no interest in doing any of the budgets on bathrooms or any relocation for the teams, anything like that. Fantasy draft is going to be turned off. NHL salary cap we're going to have on. GM firing is a part of owner mode, so it's already turned off. Head coach edits lines, we're going to turn off. We want to do that ourselves. I have Fog of War turned off. Player morale and CPU trades are both on. The owner mode and accept relocation are both off, with the owner mode being turned off. And then auto sign free agents as well as auto staff management are going to be turned off because we want to do that ourselves. Moving into the quick settings, we have a gameplay preset already here that I've established. Injuries we're going to turn off. We want to see the maximum capacity that this team has. Scrolling down, we don't want to sign free agents from earlier. Autosave is your choice. You can leave it on or off depending on what you're looking for. Franchise mode, I always leave it 25. CPU trades we want on. Difficulty, I'm going to turn up to superstar. If we scroll a little further, trade difficulty, we want it on hard. We don't want to make this easy for ourselves. If we scroll further, a couple more things from the first screen that we had, and we're going to leave auto scouting on none and auto staff management on off. Going into our advanced settings, we're going to have sim engine scoring, draft class quality, and prospect quality all on medium with sim engine shot frequency on high. This has given me the best balance in terms of realism across my saves. The only other thing I'm changing in the settings for the gameplay sliders is that attribute effects are on 10 out of 10. We want to make sure that all the players with X factors are getting a significant boost from the other. As well as in the penalty section, we're going to be turning CPU penalties up to 60. This is just to give that added power play time and give more significance to those with X factors on power play. And with all the previous formalities being addressed, let's get into this save. The last bit of housekeeping that we're going to do is sending both Travis Hamonic and Eric Gustafson over to Vancouver for an unsigned prospect. The reason for this is we don't want to get any value from them. We just want to get rid of them so that way we can start our save on the same point as what we'd see in real life. Now that housekeeping's been done, let's take a look at the lineup. I orchestrated this in the idea that with Larkin being gone, that the DeBrincat Cop Kane line would likely be the first line for the remaining season. So with that being said, we've got DeBrincat, Cop, and Kane as the first line, Emmett Finney, Casper, and Raymond, Michael Branzik-Nygaard, Barrett Hayton, and JT Comfer, and then Michael Rasmussen, Nate Danielson, and Appleton as the fourth line. Looking at the defense, this follows pretty much the pairs that ended off the last season. We have Edvinsson with Sider, Albert Johansson with Justin Falk, Ben Sherratt with ASP, and then if we look at our scratch players, JBD is down here. Looking at the goalies going into the season, we have John Gibson obviously as the starter, and then with Kosa being gone, Michael Posava is probably the one who takes Kosa's place up in Detroit. One of the last things that I forgot about is with doing all of the roster movements, I had to put Cam Talbot in Grand Rapids. So what I'm going to be doing now is trading Cam Talbot to Chicago for another unsigned player. So when we look at the rest of the roster at this point and look at all the contracts that we have, obviously up at the top, you've got Raymond, Sider, and DeBrincat. Looking at contracts that are going to need to be signed going into the season, Patrick Kane is likely to return at this point. Now, we don't know where he stands now that Larkin's been removed, so I'm going to be handling all of the future assets as if I was Steve Yzerman. So that includes the use of DeBrincat, Kane, players like Justin Falk who were just brought in, JT Comfer, that kind of thing. We also know that going into this season that we're going to have to extend Edvinsson, and obviously with bringing in Barrett Hayton, we're going to be extending him as well. One of the other things that Steve Yzerman kind of alluded to in his end-of-year presser was that the bottom six was likely to have a pretty significant rework, looking at players like JT Comfer, Michael Rasmussen, and a lot of what Todd McClellan referred to as these jerseys. So some of these players, such as Mason Appleton, for example, who really didn't put up that good of stats last season, are likely going to be moved out. So starting out with contracts, one of the first ones that I have to address is re-signing Jacob Bernard-Docker. Now, in real life, he's already been signed to a 2-year, $3.2 million extension, which comes in at right about $1.6 million at AAV. Unfortunately, in the sim, I tried to extend him at 1.6 and he already rejected it, so we're going to be extending him for a little bit more, same number of years, for 2 years at $1.725 million. So one of the other extensions that we're going to be working on is Simon Edvinsson. Now, in real life, the hope would be that Simon Edvinsson is extended for as many years as possible at whatever the dollar amount is. Now, what I would like to assume is that Simon Edvinsson in real life will come around the Jackson Lacombe and Luke Hughes numbers at right around $9 million, but this is a video game. Looking at the sim, Simon Edvinsson's asked for 3 years. We don't want that at all. We want to extend our young talent and keep them locked up for as long as possible. So we're adding in the modified no trade clause at 62% trade protection to give us that bonus on the contract interest. And then we're going to be offering him the $12.5 million to keep him right in that 80% window. The last extension we're going to do before getting into the first season is extending Barrett Hayton. Now, obviously, we aren't going to bring him in if he wasn't going to extend, and the hope here is that we can get him at a reasonable AAV with a decent number of years. Now, Barrett Hayton is 25, so he fits in with the rest of the core, so we're going to be looking at signing him by approximately a 3x3. The other thing that I really don't want to spend too much time talking about, but I at least want to make sure that you know about, is I'm going to be doing all the scouting manually. There are plenty of videos online that talk about how to do the scouting, and if that's something that everyone is interested in, I can make one in the future. But what we're going to start with is firing all of the scouts that are below a C overall, which is a good majority of them, and then we're going to go through and relocate them to the different regions that are most popular, and then we're going to start manually scouting from there. All right, so starting the season, we're going to have our first conversation with Coach Tom McClellan, see what he thinks about the roster. As expected, Tom McClellan thinks that this team is going to be rebuilding, which it obviously is. When a team loses their number one center, that will happen to everybody. So we're going to agree, and then we're going to have a preseason focus of 5-on-5. The other thing that I don't want to spend too much time on is that through each season, I'm going to be having conversations with the players about scheme fit. That's just going to be something I'm doing in the background, but I don't want to focus on it. So one of the first trades that we're going to be doing if we were Steve Yzerman is unloading Justin Falk. Now, obviously, he was signed last season for a first-round pick and a couple other assets, but at this point, with Larkin leaving, we're not ready for this team to be a cup contender or even be challenging for the playoffs, so we want to try and unload as many of these heavy burden contracts for assets as much as possible. Looking at the trades that we were offered, we have a second and a third-round pick for the Bruins. We have a second and third-round pick from Tampa Bay, as well as Dylan James. We have Sam O'Reilly and Dylan James. Now, that might be a really good package. Sam O'Reilly is rumored to be a decent middle six center, and same with Dylan James being a good 200-foot player. The last offer that we have is from the Maple Leafs, second, third, and honestly, I don't even know how to pronounce that name, but a goalie. So I think with all that being said, I do want to look at their respective values, but I think that the Sam O'Reilly and Dylan James trade is the one that we're going to go for. Looking at the assets, they're relatively close, but I do want to see if we can get a little more out of Tampa Bay. So we're going to look into their picks, and I think I'm going to start as high as a second, expecting them to reject it, and then move down from there until we hit something that's close. All right, so it really does look like that's about as close as they're going to get, but I think we can get a 7th-round pick out of Tampa Bay. They say that the value is just a bit low, so this is pretty much where they're willing to leave it, so I think we're going to take it as is. Sam O'Reilly as well as Dylan James for Justin Falk. And obviously, with Justin Falk being traded out, we're going to move ASP up to the line 2, and we're going to move Bernard Docker into the lineup. The other adjustment that I'm going to make to the lineup is I'm going to bring Dylan James in at left wing. The reason for that is I wanted to move out Mason Appleton, so we're going to have a third line now of Dylan James, Barrett Hayton, and Michael Brandt-Nygaard, moving JT Compher onto the fourth line to play with Rasmussen and Danielson. Something else that I just noticed as well is this isn't Dylan James, this is Dominic James. The reason why I'm so confused is Detroit has already drafted Dylan James, and he also has the 200-foot play style and is a left wing. The other thing I noticed if we zoom into the bottom left there is that the cap hit is underneath the minimum salary cap, so we actually need to add salary going into this season. So one of the other issues that Detroit has in their current pipeline is that they don't have many top line or high level wingers. One player that I'm looking at for this rebuild is Kent Johnson. The reason for that is there's some rumors swirling around that Columbus is not a huge fan of his current play, and they may be looking to offload his contract. So where I'm going to start in the return for Kent Johnson is a return of Dylan James, not Dominic James, Mason Appleton, as well as our 2026 second-round pick. Columbus obviously so say trade rejected, so we're going to have to add a little bit more. One thing that I'm considering is offloading Elvis Merzlikins from Columbus. The reason for that is it gives us above that minimum salary cap, and it offloads the contract out of Columbus. When we try this, they reject this as well, so we're going to have to add some more. I'm thinking of sending Mikhail Pradel back to Columbus to give them a goalie prospect to replace Elvis. Columbus, of course, are going to reject this, so we still need to add more. I'm also going to look to add next year's third-round pick, and to this, they still say no. Looking even further into the future, we're going to add a 2028 second. They still say no. With that being said, I'm struggling to think of assets that Columbus might actually want to take. They have a lot of skaters that match the block from our team, but I'm not really interested in getting away any of like Max Plant or Carter Bear, any of those types of prospects. So one of the other things I was thinking about doing is flipping the first-round pick from Utah that we got in the Dylan Larkin trade to Columbus to get a top-line winger. The problem with this is obviously if Utah falls off a cliff, then we're losing out on a pretty high pick. I think at this point, I'm just going to stand pat with what we've got and look at getting a top-line winger in the future. All right, so here we see that Barrett Hayton is actually denied our contract extension. So I think even though going into the 26-27 season, he will require an extension to play, this season he's actually still got a year left. So I think we're going to leave it for now and see how he plays and give him an extension at the beginning of next season. We also see that Simon Edvinsson has rejected our extension, which is a big problem. We're going to have to give him another offer. The third offer that we gave to Jacob Bernard Docker has been accepted, which is a really positive sign. So looking back at the Simon Edmondson extension, it's interesting to note that now he actually wants less money for more years, which is an interesting change. I'm going to be offering him $9.5 million for 8 years with the same 62% no trade clause that we had before. I also changed my mind regarding the Barrett Hayton extension. We're just going to offer him a little bit more money for the same amount of years. All right, so at this time, Barrett Hayton has rejected the second extension that we gave him at just under $4 million. So, like I said before, I think we're just going to wait to the end of the season to try another extension. We also have a Simon Edmondson extension rejected, which he actually cites that we didn't pay him enough money, which is funny because when we go back to him, he actually requested less the second time than he did on the initial. So, I actually think on this one, we're going to try and extend Simon Edmondson through the conversation mode. So, we're going to go ahead and try and charm him and see how that goes. Unfortunately, that fails, so let's discuss the terms of the contract. He wants 4 years. We're going to try and see if we can get a full 8. He then tells us that his expectation is $11.25 million per year, and I think at that point, it's a little rich for my blood, but I think when you have a number 2 defenseman like this that you want on your top pair alongside Moritz Seider for the next few years, that you pretty much are willing to pay him anything that he's asking for. I am going to try and see if he's willing to bring it down. In which he doesn't. So I think at this point, we're going to continue forward and proceed with the 11.25 at 8 years. Fortunately, also, we don't have to offer him any clause, but it is a pretty big chunk of change. All right, so one more trade that I'm going to make is I'm going to send a 2026 7th round pick and Keenan Draper over to Buffalo for Jason Zucker just to get ourselves over the cap. As you can see, they say yes. And with that being said, we're going to slot him into the 4th line instead of JT Compher. And once more, as we can see here, Simon Edmondson is rejecting our contract extension, so I'm not really sure what to do at this point. I think I might throw him just a ridiculous amount of money, try and get him into the 90% acceptance rate, so you might see that next. All right, the last offer I'm going to try and make to Simon Edmondson mid-season is 8 years, $12.7 million with a 20-team no trade, and let's see if he accepts it. All right, Simon Edmondson also rejects this offer, so we're going to have to give a shot in the offseason. All right, guys, looking into the trade deadline, we are 6th in the Atlantic with 64 points. We are only 2 points outside of a wild card spot, but we don't have a game. The Sabres have a game in hand on us, and Montreal has 2 games in hand. So I think kind of to be expected that we would be outside of the playoffs. I think the thing that's most surprising to me is Ottawa has 33 points. They're 14-42 in 61 games. Looking at a record, we're 26, 25, and 12. That's pretty good, right around 500 with the 12 overtime losses here. The thing that I'm noticing is that John Gibson at a 902 is probably keeping us a little bit more afloat than what we really want to be. The goal for this season is honestly to tank as hard as possible. And what we're seeing right now is that unfortunately we still have a couple players that are too good to let us really fail. Obviously, looking at the top line between DeBrincat, Kane, and Kopp, Patrick Kane rolling back the years, almost a point per game player at age 37 is kind of nuts. Both him and Andrew Kopp having really, really high shooting percentages. It's really good to see that ASP is doing fairly well, considering this would be his second season on Detroit. Emmett Finney, only with 23 points, not really surprising. He's obviously on a line between Raymond and Casper. Casper's overall is not that high. Taking a look at the rest of the stats, nothing too unexpected. I think the biggest thing that I'm a little bit concerned with is obviously Edvardson and Ajo here with the -10. We see that pretty much across the board with the team. Taking a look at our goaltenders, John Gibson putting up a 902, and Michael Postava in 13 games has a 911 save percentage with a 289 goals against. That's pretty nuts. I mean, he's not playing a whole lot. He's coming in at 73. He hasn't even gone up at all. So I think going into the trade deadline, we're obviously going to be sellers. I think we're going to be looking to move on from contracts like Compher, someone like John Gibson. We can get some returns for these players. Barrett Hayton is actually requesting an extension now, which is unexpected considering how poor the team has been performing. But yeah, I think something along the lines of getting Jason Zucker out, who we obviously got to avoid the salary cap, getting JT Compher out. Really just making this team as young as possible in the upcoming seasons is going to be the goal. I think as much as possible, we want to try and hold on to DeBrincat. I think this is going to be the last year that we extend Patrick Kane. So we're going to get really young really quickly, but hopefully with the idea of turning it around in the near future. All right, guys, so moving into the trade deadline, we obviously have selected seller, and looking at the players available, Ovi, Matheson, Strome, Dunn. A lot of these guys are really not going to be on our radar. Hopefully in a couple years we'll be able to look at this list and look for some buys here. As it is, I think what I'm going to be trying to do is finding trades for some of the older guys that we have. And trying to turn them around for higher picks, prospects, and or younger players that fit the core of this team. So one of the first players that I really would like to move on from is JT Comfort. He's basically fallen off a cliff since the start of the season. He started at an 83 overall. He's down to a 77. He obviously hasn't been playing. He does have a modified trade, and I'm honestly not really concerned with the return. I think in real life, any sort of trade for JT Comfort probably looks like Detroit giving up some sort of assets to actually move him. So the fact that in this save we're actually getting something back is fairly surprising. Looking at the returns, 4th, 3rd round picks is about where we're at. I do want to prioritize getting picks for the 26th draft. So I think that I'm going to take this Dallas Stars and Florida Panthers one, even though both of those teams, they're likely late 3rd round picks. So we're going to say yes to this and move on from JT Comfort. Thank you for your service. We're looking to get a little bit younger now. Another 2 contracts that I want to look at getting rid of are Jason Zucker and Mason Appleton. Obviously, this will mean we're going to pull up some guys from Grand Rapids, but that's okay. Like I said, same thing as before. We're looking to get younger, and same approximate return for Mason Appleton. We're looking at 3rd round picks. I think we're going to take the Los Angeles Kings from the Rangers. It's probably going to be the highest return. I'm willing to bet Toronto. We know Toronto's at least above us, so I think we're going to get the best return from the LA Kings here. I believe those were our 2 scratch players, so now when we go to trade Jason Zucker, we're probably going to move someone up from GR. Looking at the trade for Jason Zucker, there's only one trade on the board, and it's from the Islanders for a 2027 4th, and I can't remember his first name off the top of my head. Is it Ian? No, Isaiah George. I mean, he's young. We really do have a lot of defensemen, but not a lot of left defensemen. So I think in this case, I'm okay with the return. I do want to see if we can get something maybe a little bit higher than a 4th. They don't have one here, so maybe a 3rd for 2027. And they say no. Okay, so we're going to go with the 2026 4th that they offered. And let's see if we could throw in a 2027 7th, or 2026 7th, sorry. They say no to that as well. So we'll take the 2026 4th. And as we can see now, Anton Johansson and John Leonard have both been called up to the NHL to replace the roster spots of all the players that have been let go. All right, so I think now we're going to be looking at what team will take John Gibson. And looking at everything right now and looking at the players that are available, I think we're going to have to come up with our own sort of trade. And a team that comes to mind, obviously, is Edmonton, because Edmonton has Connor McDavid, and they've been looking for a goalie for quite a bit of time now. And I think what's going to happen is we're going to have to take back some form of contract. Looking at Tristan Jarry here, he's got 3 years left on his deal. I'm not really interested in that. Connor Ingram coming in at 1 year, I think we would like to take back. We're obviously going to be under the salary cap, but I think the goal is just to get out of this contract more than anything else. They really aren't going to have a lot of prospects, and I'm not that I wasn't expecting them to be willing to give up any roster players, but let's see if they have any that they might be willing to let go. You know, we're looking at players good depth players like Podkol's in here. Kapanen's a little older, so I'm not really all that interested. Players like Matt Savoy, I think it's interesting that he has really low trade value, so I actually think I want to look at doing this. We're going to be under the cap if we do so we actually need to continue adding, and let's see if we could find a contract that's a bit heavy for them. So John Gibson is really putting us like barely above the cap, so I think we're going to save this maybe for the off season. Obviously, hopefully we'll have the Edmonton extension in place, we'll have the Barrett Hayton extension, so we'll have a little bit more money in the players that we currently have on the roster, so hopefully we won't have that issue. I think that's all I'm going to do for this trade deadline. Obviously, we're not looking to sign any players here. I think I'll just take one look through each team's trading block and see what kind of players are up. If we find something that is young, works with our current timeline, then I'm probably going to pull the trigger on that. But otherwise, the next cut should be the end of the season. All right, guys. So ending off the season, we actually finished with a record of 36, 32, and 14, which is a lot better than I was expecting. We finished sixth at the Atlantic and basically 4 points out of a playoff spot. So missing the playoffs wasn't exactly surprising, but being as close as we are, I think I expected us to be a lot closer to the Senators than we were to clinching a playoff spot. Looking down at the Central Division, where we traded Dylan Larkin, as you can see, Utah is 8th in the Central with 80 points. We're actually going to go take a look at their team right now. And looking at the Utah lineup, we see that Dylan Larkin has gone down to an 82 rated forward with 19 goals and 23 assists in 81 games. Probably his worst season, I would guess, since his rookie season. He's playing third line center in between Brandon Tanev and Yamamoto here. I don't think this is what Utah would have expected when making this trade, and right now it seems like we certainly got off on the better foot here. So I think this might be my worst nightmare. Thank God that in real life this didn't happen, and the Detroit pick that was 15th stayed at 15th, because this is my hell. St. Louis, with the pick that they got from Detroit in the Justin Falk trade, jumps from 11-1 to win the lottery in the Gavin McKenna and Ivar Stenbark draft. We actually, in the Utah pick, go backwards from 6 to 8. I can't believe that. That's insane. Looking at the stats at the end of the season, Patrick Kane finishing with 86 points, 39 goals, and 47 assists in 82 games is absolutely wild. Rolling back the years at age 37 and then putting up a point per game is just insane. Alex DeBrincat following along in his footsteps. Lucas Raymond, not as good as I was hoping he would be. Obviously, with Larkin being on, you really hope that him and Seider are stepping up. Seider, speaking of, finishing with a half point per game. Obviously, this last season, he finished with 60 points. This season at 45. Watching him take a step back here is not exactly a surprise. The team is obviously worse. Seeing our two top line centers at 62 points and 48 points. Marco Kasper, around a half point per game center, is about where we expect him to be. Andrew Kopp putting up 62 points is pretty much unheard of. Barrett Hayton putting up 34 points is not my favorite. ASP putting up 34 is a really good sign for him being an offensive defenseman of the future. Obviously, seeing a lot of these other guys at lower points isn't that surprising. You know, we got Edvidson, Bernard Docker, Johansson, Sherratt. None of these guys are exactly offensive stalwarts, so seeing them all here isn't exactly a shock. Looking into the goalies, we see John Gibson with 69 games played, had 28 wins and 28 losses, finishing with a .903 save percentage. We also see that Michael Postava here finished with 8-5 with 2 overtime losses with a .911 save percentage. So good development year for him playing the backup to John Gibson. The hope would be is that we get someone in next season to either allow us to trade John Gibson or we ride John Gibson's contract out and then Postava as the starter with Augustine moving forward. Looking at Grand Rapids, it looks like they actually made it into the playoffs, winning round 1 and losing in the second round, similarly to real life, this time to the Ontario Reign. So it was a good season for them with a record of 37, 26, and 9. A lot of good prospects coming up with Tej and Denaye leading the way. All right, guys, going in the draft, we obviously see St. Louis with the number 1 pick, us obviously coming into 8th. So looking at the draft class, we have the usual suspects in Gavin McKenna and Ivar Stenbark. So where we're looking at is approximately the 8th pick, which is Viggo Bjork. He's a player that I think if Detroit was in real life around this range that they would definitely be picking. Obviously, the Swedish connection with Raymond. He is a late birthday, which is a little bit concerning, but otherwise I think it's pretty good. The other option is we could try and trade up and get Chase Reed. In real life, he's definitely rumored to be one of the top defensemen of the draft. Same thing with Keaton Verhoff here. So looking in, I just want to make sure that around that area that we don't have any unexpected gems or generated players, which it doesn't look like we do. So I think if we get up to the 8th, 9th overall pick, then we're going to be taking Viggo Bjork. So assuming to our pick, obviously Gavin McKenna goes number 1 overall, with Ivar Stenbark actually going to Winnipeg of all places. Lawrence Reed goes 4th overall, Keaton Verhoff goes 5th. Belchet's, Carroll's, and then obviously that leaves us. That the next player in line is Viggo Bjork, so we will be taking him to join the Detroit Red Wings. He's coming in at a top 6 high, 71 overall, so obviously we're going to probably send him to Grand Rapids for the first season, and then hopefully next season we'll be able to play him in Detroit. The other thing that I want to do is actually look for any high potentials. So when we sort from here, we actually have a goalie here in the 245 range for high elite, and it's Bradley Miller. So I think we'll be taking him with some of our later picks, but I just want to look through and make sure that we're not going to be missing anybody. We do have a medium elite McCormick here, right around 27. We would have to trade up and into that pick to get it, so I don't think we're going to be doing that. Looking at some other guys here, we did miss out on a lot of low elites. But we do have a lot of top 6 forwards. This is coming in the teens, first round area. But I think basically what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we get the goaltender that was high elite up here. And we're going to take pretty much the highest potential spot in the rest of the picks. So one of our picks here, this is our second round pick. We have RM Olsen, who has a potential only 3 bars for medium elite. So we're going to take him with the expectation that he's probably not going to be that high. He actually comes in as a top 6 forward, so pretty much right around the same players that are around his range. So no harm, no foul there. An offer from the Calgary Flames comes in for a third round pick for a 2027 6th and 2027 7th. I'm really not interested in trading picks for next year. The hope is that we're going to be better, but I'm really not interested in gathering too many picks right now. So in the late 5th round, we actually take Casey Mutrin here, who is a 17-year-old right wing, and he comes in with an X factor and 70 overall. So that is a really good pickup for a late round pick. So it'll be interesting to see if he ends up making it to the NHL before our save is over. All right, so that's the end of the draft. We obviously finished with a decent number of picks, taking Viggo Bjork. I'm really happy with pulling him into this team. I think he'll be a great pick for the future. It is really disappointing that the first round pick that we sent for Justin Falk obviously became the number 1 overall pick, winning the lottery for Gavin McKenna. And I think Detroit fans will understand my pain when I say that. That's not surprising to me at all that happened in the save. I actually am more surprised it didn't happen in real life also. So with that being said, that's the draft, and we'll get into next season. All right, so getting into the re-sign phase for the end of the season, obviously I want to prioritize getting Simon Edvinsson extended. He's still coming in at 3 years, $8 million, and I'm really not willing to do anything that's less than 6 years. Looking at that, it looks like he wants just over $11 million, so let's see where that puts us for the current contract interest. Putting it at 11,875 doesn't even put him into the 80%. So like I said, I think we're going to move it into... I think we're going to do a full no move at this point. At this point, he'll be 29. He'll be in his prime. I'm really not concerned with those later years. He's not interested in 8 years. He isn't interested in 6. So I think we're just going to bump this contract down at this point until 11 million, see where that stands. So we're only getting 2 years of no trade. If he's really not doing well in the end of year 4, so at age 27, we'll obviously give him up. But he's already at 86 overall at age 23 playing top line minutes with Sider. I'm really not concerned that we're going to want to move him. That's probably going to be right in the cup window if I had to guess. So with that being said, I'm going to offer him 6 years at $11 million with a full no trade clause and see what he says. In the same vein, while we're here, I'm going to extend Barrett Hayton, but just to give you guys a heads up, a lot of these guys that are playing the AHL right now, and obviously Caleb Denayer and stuff like that, are going to get extended. I'm just going to show the key ones, that way we're not wasting time. So looking at Barrett Hayton, we're actually going to throw him a 3x3 just as we did at the beginning of the season. He obviously had a really rough season, so I think that we're more likely to get an acceptance at this point. And then obviously going into the other piece that came back in the Utah trade, we're going to be offering Caleb Denayer 2 years at $1 million. He had no interest in doing 3, otherwise we would have thrown it to him, and we're going to give him the 2-way contract. One of the other extensions that we're going to be doing is we're going to be offering Bjork his ELC right now. I want to get him into the AHL as fast as possible and get him playing minutes in Grand Rapids. All right, and with that being said, we obviously see that Barrett Hayton has rejected our offer. He wants to be vying for a Stanley Cup team. And with that being said, I'm going to keep trying to extend him for a reasonable number of dollars. I think anything under $4 million at 3 years is right around where I want to be. And I believe, based on the morale, yep, here we go. We see Simon Edvinsson finally accepts his contract, so he's going to be sticking with this team for 6 years until he's 29, and that's a really good sign for the future. We also see that Caleb Denayer accepts his offer for the LC in Grand Rapids, so obviously that's really great to see as well. So this is something that I was interested in after the year that Patrick Kane had. He wants 2 years at $11 million, so we're going to go ahead and let Patrick Kane walk. Super grateful for the time that he had, and especially some of the goals that he scored. I think back immediately to the goal he scored against Chicago in Chicago, making his return. 2 seasons ago, and that's a memory that sticks out in my head. But we're not going to be re-signing Patrick Kane. It's just too expensive, especially at age 37. The production's likely going to dry up. So where I land with Barrett Hayton is he's obviously not willing to extend long term. He's looking at 1 year at roughly $2.8 million. I was able to bring it down to 2.5 at 90% contract interest. So we're going to try and get him to extend for 1 year. If he extends for a year, we'll look back at his contract next season. And here we see that Barrett Hayton is still not willing at the dollar value, so we're going to keep trying. I think this time I'm going to enter negotiation with him, similar to what we did with Evanson, and see if we can convince him to stay. So the charm actually worked. He appreciates that our confidence in him is there, and he's willing to make more discussions. So we're going to go to contract. He's obviously looking for only a year. I think at this point, I just want to get him extended and stop having to worry about this. So we'll give him the year that he's asking for. He wants the $2.8 million. So I think we're just going to do that. We're going to offer him what he's asking for. It's not that expensive, especially for a third, fourth line guy, and especially at 1 year. Currently, the contract's showing him in Grand Rapids. He obviously will be playing in Detroit. We're going to offer the contract and see what he comes back to. So something that I was also thinking of is that I've been wondering where Trey Augustine is, and I'm able to search for him, and it says that he is part of the Detroit organization, but I'm unable currently to sign him, and I don't see him in my available contracts. It obviously says that he's unsigned. So I'm going to keep looking for him, and obviously if I see him, I'm going to sign him because long term, I think with Costa going out, he is the goalie of the future. But otherwise, we might end up losing him for nothing just because I can't find him in the system. Finally, we have the end of the Barrett Hayton extension saga. He takes the 1 year, and we'll have him for next season. So with all the extensions out of the way outside of Patrick Kane, we're going to be looking at the free agent crop for this season. Obviously, in real life, we're looking at players like Alex Tuck, Jason Robertson hasn't extended yet. A lot of these players, Evgeny Malkin, whilst on this trade list, has obviously been re-signed in Pittsburgh. We're going to be looking for two things. Either players that fit our cup window around the 25 age window, which don't usually get to free agency, or we're going to be looking for very short-term veteran presence that we can put on the team, basically just to fill up spots until the kids are ready. A player that I'm surprised to see here is actually Nikishin out of Carolina. So I think at 24 years old, he wants 2 years at $5 million. He's not an RFA. I think we're going to offer him a contract. I think it would be awesome to put him behind Edvinsson and then put Albert Johansson down on the third pair. So looking at Nikishin, I think we're going to offer him $5.5 million at 4 years. It gets him right over that 80% window. As he's age 24, he fits the rest of the core of the team, and I think getting him locked up for at least a bridge deal will be good for the future of the team. So as you can see, Nikishin has accepted our offer for 4 years, and that's a really good sign for the organization. We're going to have a left-sided pair of Edvinsson, Nikishin, and likely Albert Johansson for the foreseeable future, unless other things change. Looking at the rest of the free agent crop, there's not many players I think that fit the mold of our age range and or high age, low amount of years. I think at this point, I want to let the kids play, and if we're worse for it short term, I'm okay with that. We'll get some more high draft picks. We obviously have our next year pick available, so that will be good. And I think we're going to move on to next season. So now we see that we have to set our captains and alternate captains going into the season, and I think the general consensus among Wings fans is that Mo Seider is going to be the next captain of the Detroit Red Wings now that Larkin is leaving. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if in next season with Larkin gone, if they leave it open for the following season. But I do think that Raymond is going to keep his A. I noticed that DeBrincat was given the captain for this, and I honestly don't disagree. I think that looking at the rest of the core, he's the most likely to take up an assistant captain role, especially with Kane being gone and a lot of the other leadership being turned over. So we're going to give the A to DeBrincat. So looking at the next season, I think we're going to have a bit of a mixed bag of a season. Obviously, looking at the forward lineup, we're missing a ton of offensive power here. Obviously, with Kane being gone, now our top line looks like Raymond, Kasper, and DeBrincat. Kasper had a really good season. He's up to an 85 now. And I think for the future of this franchise, until Denoye is ready, Nate Danielson really needs to step up and take on that 2C role. Obviously, we had Andrew Kopp there, or could have Andrew Kopp there, but I think in order to have the second line be as good as it possibly can be, you need to have Kopp on the wing with Nate Danielson and Michael Brenzak-Nygaard. Looking at the third line, we see Dominic James with Barrett Hayton and Michael Rasmussen. I think what I'm going to do instead, if it's an option for me, with Dominic James being able to play center, I think I want to move Emmett Finney up to third line. Then that way we have Finney, Barrett Hayton, and Michael Rasmussen. And then on the bottom pair, TJ Ginla has already made his way up to the Detroit Red Wings. He had a really great season, I'm assuming, in GR. He's 20 years old, 80 rated. He's ready for the next step up. Looking at the defensive pairings, adding Nikishin has completely changed the outlook of this defensive core. We have Edmondson with Sider, which is a great first pair. Nikishin is bordering Sandin Pellica, who's up to an 87 after last season, which is perfect and really important for the long-term future of this franchise. As we mentioned before, Albert Johansson gets bumped onto the third pair with Jacob Bernard-Docker, which I think is a completely serviceable third pairing for the NHL. Then, of course, looking at our goaltenders, John Gibson returns for his second season as a Detroit Red Wing, with Michael Prestava still as the backup. The last thing I want to do before the season starts is move up Carter Bear up to the NHL in place of John Leonard. I think John Leonard is a great player, but I think he's better suited in helping Grand Rapids and getting them long-term into the playoffs with the younger core that we still have there. I also think it's really important to get Carter Bear up to the NHL as fast as possible, because how he projects may change the look of this franchise. This team really struggles with top six forwards, and if Carter Bear can hit his potential, I think adding him in the top six will be really important for the future. So with that being said, we now have TJ Ginla on the left, Carter Bear centering, along with Dominic James on the right. And then, of course, as we look into GR, John Leonard is going to be playing top line with Caleb Denaye, and then Max Plante makes his initial debut season for the Grand Rapids Griffins. I think that he might be one of the keys to replacing Patrick Kane in the long-term future. Obviously, he doesn't have the ceiling that Patrick Kane does, but Detroit really struggles with having players that have playmaking talent, and so I really think that he could be important for the Red Wings' future. We, of course, obviously have Lombardi still in the system, Carter Mazur is still here, and we have really excited prospects in Andre Becker, Jesse Kiskinen, and Eddie Genberger still have yet to grace the lineup. Looking at the defensive core, there's not a whole lot going on here that's different. William Molinder is a player who may eventually grace the NHL, but is not someone that Detroit should be really banking on. And I think the same thing goes for Tuomisto. The one player that I'm really interested in after seeing Grand Rapids' playoff berth was actually Anton Johansson. The dude's big, he can skate, he's got a mean streak in him, and I think if we can get him some more minutes in Grand Rapids, that could be important to slotting him in on that third pair instead of Jacob Bernard-Docker. And with that being said, that's going to wrap up the first season of Detroit Red Wings post the Dylan Larkin trade to Utah. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you have a nice day. See ya.